بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum everybody and welcome back to Connections. We're joined again with Sheikh Idris. Assalamu alaikum Sheikh Idris.
Wassalam wa rahmatullah.
Alhamdulillah, thanks for joining us today again.
No problem, it's always a pleasure.
It is our pleasure, Sidi. And we're back here for episode 6. Today we wanted to have a bit of a philosophical conversation, a little bit not as clinically oriented, but you'll find that actually it is the framework of the clinical approach that we're talking about today. It is the underbelly, it is the foundation, it is the seedbed by which a holistic, trauma-informed, process-oriented clinical approach to trauma healing can emerge from, right? And what kind of principle foundation is that? It is one that I would argue is fully Islamic. That's what would allow for this model to really shine. To talk about this and to frame it a little bit before we jump in, I'd like to talk a little bit about Islamic cosmology, right? The nature of cosmology, the nature of the cosmos or ontology, the nature of the world, nature of being, excuse me. That's what ontology means, the nature of being. And so for me, I've been interested in ontology because as a naturopathic doctor and someone who is committed to healing human beings, I can't do that if I don't understand the nature of human being at a very fundamental level. Because if we're just adopting the secular, technological, scientific conceptions of what man is, we're losing so much of the reality of who man is. And we can't really help man then, because we're reducing so much of this complexity, so much of this harmony between self and non-self, connection with God, connection with nature, and reducing it to a couple variables, which is totally unproductive. And I would say even oppressive. Just really, it's unjust. And I find it to be unjust in some way and stripping the rights of the human being. And so we wanted to pan out a little bit more. And I think it's probably a part 2 to the last conversation we had about mental health being not so a mental phenomenon, but more than that. And we wanted to say that, the human being fundamentally is comprised of 3 basic parts. This is the 3 parts that is spoken to in the hadith of Gabriel, when the Prophet ﷺ taught us about Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. And those are the levels of the jism, the ruh, and the nafs. Right, the body, the soul, and the spirit. Now we'll talk about how maybe we can talk about this, Idris, how we're going to name the nefs, because we've talked a little bit off screen about mind, this word of the mind, and how we don't really like that word. So, but for now, maybe we can say tentatively, and we'll talk about it in a bit here, inshallah, body, soul, and spirit for now. And the idea is that these 3 levels comprise the human being. These are 3 worlds that the human being lives in. So the body is a physical reality that lives in the material world. It resides in the material world. It's present in that world. We have the soul, or people say the mind, or the nefs, we'll call it just the nefs, that lives in another world. And the ruh lives in the other world. Maybe we can call that like the malakut or the jabarut or whatever. I mean, these are higher levels of being, but we're in all of these levels at the same time. That's what's really interesting about this. It's like you are currently now in the malakut, in one part of you. Like you're already inhabiting that world. And so we want to expand our conception. We're not just in dunya. We're not just in the material world. The spiritual world is here right now because the ruh is here right now. And your nafs, which is immaterial. So we don't want to fragment and dissociate ourselves from the get-go by saying, oh, we're in the material world in this physical reality. That's not really true, right? And it can inform not only your practice and your reflection, but also, our science and our medicine as Muslims. When we begin to see it other than that, we got to expand our horizons to see that we're actually inhabiting multiple worlds here now, in the present moment, physically and spiritually, right? So, we have these different parts of us that inhabit different worlds. Allah Ta'ala is Rabbul Alameen. And so we want to be able to understand these different worlds inside of us. Right? Imam Ali has this amazing couplet. You've all heard this couplet. I say this, I recite it quite a bit because it's so beautiful. And he goes, تحسب نفسك أنك جرم صغير. You considered yourself to be this insignificant thing. وفيك انطواء العالم الأكبر. But within you resides, unfolded, the higher world. The higher world. And so you have this inside of you. I have this inside of me. We as human beings are unfolded micro worlds of multiple kingdoms, of the plant kingdom, of the animal kingdom, of the mineral kingdom, of the angelic, of the bestial, whatever, so forth, and beyond even. You know, we are the son of prophets and daughters of prophets. I mean, these are complex realities. We have transgenerational realities that come into us. We will inshallah ta'ala transmit to our children and our offspring, and continue that transmission of information and energy and love and dua, and maybe even our wounds. And that's part of the healing journey, is how do we begin to uncouple those things so that we can send the good down and remove the bad, so that we can become vital and healthy in our lifetime and give our children and those to come a better chance, inshallah ta'ala, at finding their wholeness and finding their sense of self and their purpose, inshallah ta'ala. So these are just a little bit of a couple of reflections I wanted to start with, but we wanted to open this up, inshallah ta'ala, and explore today more directly this idea of the nafs, because the ruh is kind of this reality that no one knows much about. As we're told in the Quran, Allah Ta'ala tells us the ruh is something that we don't know much about directly. He just says it. And so, the jism, we know a lot about it in some way. The science really focuses on the materiality of our physical bodies. But this idea, this nafs, what is this nafs? This bridge between the physical and the spiritual. What is this, local consciousness, this mind, this hub of information, of energy? What is its reality? How can we begin to really understand it? Because that is our goal as Muslims, as our teachers tell us and teach us and indicate to us. The one who knows himself, his nafs, knows his Lord. So this is a deep reality, something that's very important for the Muslim life purpose, for their purpose in life, to be able to ascertain the reality of their nafs and to extend that understanding to their entire lives, inshallah ta'ala. So without further ado, inshallah ta'ala, Sidi, I wanted to open this up to you. What is your basic conception of the nafs? I know we've been talking a little bit, actually for years. I remember even emails we'd throw back and forth a long time ago about ideas like this. And be curious as to how would you begin to frame your idea of the nafs and its reality?
Yeah, I mean, what's confusing is because the nafs, when we look at the nafs is really our essence and who we are. And it comprises all those things of the body, the mind and the spirit. And so first and foremost, just as you mentioned about the famous hadith of Jibreel, where the Prophet ﷺ says, Islam is Islam, Iman, Ihsan. So straight away, we're mentioning the whole, which is Islam, but then we're compartmentalizing it and then naming Islam something different.
Beautiful.
And so we have the nafs is the nafs, the qalb or the ruh or the jism. But when I'm looking at the nafs, first and fundamentally, nafs can cover all those aspects. That's what I'm getting at there.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. And that's what makes it very confusing, this term nafs, because it depends what we're referring to when we speak of that. And I think that's where a lot of misunderstandings come. And the general conception is nafs is something that I have to fight against. And I'm always in conflict with it. I should mistrust it. And I need to transcend it. And that brings problems if we're not understanding what we're talking about here, because the nafs can mean a number of things. And we don't always want to be fighting that thing that we consider the nafs, well, we've got to define what we're fighting and what we're in conflict with, and do we want to transcend it? Because if we don't understand things correctly, we could be actually doing detriment to ourselves and our spirit and our physical well-being, our mental well-being, our emotional well-being, and our spiritual well-being, if we're in conflict with something that actually is we need and it's essential for us to grow.
Yeah, I had this idea of careful what you ask for. It's like, you sure you really want to like lose your sanity and your sense of self? That's what you're asking, as opposed to perfecting it, as opposed to really honoring it and developing it to its furthest horizon.
Yeah, and that's what's essential in Islam. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. We're talking he who reaps his reward is the one who enables to purify but grow it, and nurtures it. So we are not looking to eradicate something, we're looking for it to grow. And there may be instances in our spiritual experiences where we feel an eradication of the self, but we still have to come back to it. That's what's really important. We're never free of it. And what is the nafs? So from a linguistic point of view, I think it's really important we look at the linguistic definition or nuances of the word. I've got it here on something I'm looking at. It says the meaning of this root refers to a subtle body passing from an opening whilst having a dramatic impact on it. So it's something passing through something. So we're fundamentally, as you've mentioned a lot, we're looking at life force here. And it's like permeating something and passing through it. So what we understand straight away is there's movement and vitality here. But it can be erratic and chaotic, depending on what we're experiencing and how we're dealing with it. So it can develop into chaotic energy, and it can feel very destructive, but we're not looking to eradicate that. We're looking to channel it and nurture it and enable it to be channel it in a way towards growth and towards our betterment. Because if we try to eradicate that energy, we will lose the energy that we need to feel alive. And it's something that passes through something, rectifying it and giving it the ability to act. So it's that life force that gives us the ability to then use that energy with with containing it and channeling it through our agency that we've spoken about in a previous session, in an episode. It can also refer to an essence which is distinguishable and apparent. And so that's basically what I'm aware of. So there, it's consciousness is what I'm conscious of. There's an essence which is distinguishable and apparent. So as I relate to me, my sense of self, that's the nafs. And we definitely don't want to be eradicating that. But we recognize, this is the important thing, we recognize that is limited. Of course it's limited. And we want to enable it to grow into a greater sense of awareness, but always acknowledging it's limited. And that is when in a modern context, in light of all the struggles we have, I really find it's a healthier way of understanding the istighfar, of that I feel like a sense of I'm not enough, is that I understand that that I am limited. And that's a much healthier way of looking at things rather than I'm grossly insufficient. And that distinction is huge, because I see that in our community a lot, is that I'm nothing, I'm not worthy. And that has a place, but it's got to be connected to other aspects of ourselves, where with gratitude and a real appreciation of who we are and the gift that God's given us.
Absolutely.
And that's really important.
What came to mind, just if I may interject there first for a moment, it's like we want to be able to be engaged in kind of our relative sense of our relationships, the relative sense that we have different relationships in our lives that we want to be able to attune to in the way that honors both parties. And so with one another, there's no reason for one to belittle oneself when we're with one another. I mean, you can give esteem to an elder or a scholar or, what have you, but in some way there's a type of dignity that is always owed, if we're dealing with creation, for example, or with other types of beings. But with Allah Ta'ala, what is owed there. Our friend is back here, mashallah, welcome. What is right is what is owed there is to recognize our contingency to Allah Ta'ala, our dependence, our limitation, and that's where ubudiyya comes in. And it's not this, shame and guilt for even existing. I mean, this is it doesn't have to go
into. That's a big one. You don't have to justify your being.
It's a gift. Allah Ta'ala gave it to you. Like, we're not here to. It's not kufran al-ni'am. I mean, it almost falls into, I feel like, kufran al-ni'am. It's like
it is
almost like just turning away the gift of God. When you say, I give you this amazing existence, you could have not been. You were just, in it's like you were nothing. And you were just potential. And Allah actualized you and gave you a life in this amazing, like, vital life body system thing that we have, this amazing existence, the cream of creation. We have intellect, we have power in our bodies, we have agency, we have will, we have passion, we have our own personality. It's like, what a gift. And for you to in some way negate that, to shame yourself for having it, like you came up with it in the first, like you built it or something, like you may have a bad, like you messed up a dish or something in the kitchen, you messed up. This is a gift from Allah. It's not yours in the first place. You have to honor it. And it's a type of kufran, I really feel, and not to shame people that have this sense of self, there's other issues that inform that type of presentation and that type of, subjective reality for that person. But just to really pan out and just to appreciate that the nafs is not this evil thing that you want to seek to destroy. I mean, I think you mentioned it previously that, it's nafs al-amara bis-su. It's the first stage that goes
that's really, this is important, this point. This is the next thing we need to address.
Please.
And so let's have a conversation about this. Is that this, I'm going to reframe what this is just a pragmatic, I'm a pragmatist, and I say, does it work? So sometimes when I express things, people are like, well, that's not how people understood things in the past. But they were working from a very different, they were working with a whole different paradigm. So we do have to, we're not negating the very principles, no way. But we're having to reframe the terminology and conception just to bring us back to a balance. So we're having to apply a different approach. So when we first of all, we understand that these stages of the nafs, they're all needed. So you need to be and they're stages. They're not like, that's what's so beautiful that Charles Upton mentions, is that in other traditions, then the nafs, is something that needs to be bashed, basically, and in opposition to it. From an Islamic perspective, they're states of growth. So there's always a nafs there, but they're growing into different things.
It's nurturing.
So the child is in an egoic state. And it's all fundamentally, it's about its needs needing to be tended to, and so it's a very primitive state, but a very necessary state, and it has to be its needs met and attuned to. But at some point, it's got to shift. And it has to grow into something else. So when I say nafs al-amaratun bis-su, we're talking about the egoic self. And we want to be really curious about where that's showing up in our life. I was just reading in Gabor Mate's Scattered Minds. He speaks about time. He says the ADD mind is very much a childlike state. And one of the qualities of the childlike state is it has no concept of time. It lives in the now. And it feels like any sort of break from the now, it's like it's, like when mother leaves the room and says, I'm back in 5 minutes, it can't conceptualize that. It's impulsive and it wants things now. Now that's understandable for the child at that age. But if that type of character is showing up in a 15-year-old or a 25-year-old, we are at nafs al-ammaratun bis-su there. Now, nafs al-ammaratun bis-su is not like it calls to evil. It's egoic. That's a necessary state in the developmental stages when you're a child. But we need to recognize, this is not healthy for me as a 15-year-old or a 24-year-old to be impulsive and need things immediate, have a need for immediacy. And when, always leaving things to the last minute. I'm in a childlike state at this point. So I need growth. Now, Does that mean I batter it and demonize it? No. Well, that depends. It depends on what's appropriate at the time. But I feel in our day and age, we can't apply that approach of breaking the horse.
Mm.
I say, if it works, try it. But if it's not working, if you're seeing yourself after 3 months sabotaging that and going back to falling back into bad habits.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, someone's an alcoholic. So you basically, I'm going cold turkey on myself, and I'm going to purge myself and force myself in line. Fantastic. If that works for you, try it. But if after 3 months or 6 months suddenly some challenge comes in and right back to square one, we might need a more gentle approach. So there's different approaches to address this, and people of the past had different approaches to how to deal with this, and variegated ways of enabling this nafs to grow. So I feel that's really important, that suddenly we're in an egoic state, and then as we're children, we start to become more aware of the other, which is what we call now ethnocentric. So I'm aware of my group, my immediate group, the mother, the father, my siblings. And that's the nafs al-lawwama, that I'm aware that it's not just about me. And there's accountability now. Hang on a minute. And there's greater sense of self in relationship to now. So this is the second stage, nafs al-lawwama. And the thing is, this isn't from my experience, and I can talk from my experience, it's not suddenly I'm at nafs al-lawwama now, and nafs al-amara to bisu, because in certain areas of my life, I can see that impulsivity, I can see that childlike state. If, for example, in my relationship with my wife, I can see that I'm very impulsive and childlike. So that's the nafs al-amara manifesting itself. Whilst, for example, at work with my boss, or in other areas, I can be quite mature. Because I've been taken through the stages of I've had mentorship to take me through those stages in my, through my studies and through my work. But maybe when it comes to deep personal relationships, you've not had the ability to grow. So I find it's so much more practical approach to looking at these stages. So where is nafs al-amara showing up? It's where we're impulsive. It's where we become like a child and we're getting emotionally activated, and we want the other person. We're basically, you need to regulate me, and everyone needs to be there for me. I know, and I invite the listeners to be curious about that, where that's showing up, because we've all still got those, that's showing up in areas.
Absolutely.
Then accountability, nafs al-lawwama. And then there comes to a point in our lives where now we actually feel at peace with ourselves, and we can actually let go of our needs and give to others and feel in a state of okayness about, I can actually be present and tend to others and be in relationship to Allah and let my needs go. And when I say not your fundamental needs, but let things go, and you don't feel resentment, you don't feel you're bypassing or trying to sort of transcend those needs. It feels like, yeah, I can give some time to others. I can give my money to others. I can, and so forth and so forth. There's that tranquility. And now we're to some degree, what comes up for me there is that we're taking away from the spirituality aspect of it to some degree. This is a very in the world, but they obviously this will have, this has this refracts off all of the different aspects of ourselves. So we're
as above, so below, and so below as above.
Yeah, and that's really important for us to see things from that perspective, I think.
Yeah, totally beautiful. So in some way, there is a growth. There is like a growing in terms of maqam, a station, as some of the languaging is used. But then you can still have ahwal. You can still have maybe blind spots. You can have still things where other situations trigger or bring out other elements of that. And there's no shame in that also. It's like, I'm not sure, Allahu alam, maybe it is the case, but I'm not sure there's ever a place where, if we're talking about transcending and including, like we did last week, transcending and including, that impulsive kind of nature, you ever want it to go away? I mean, and I'm sure in the shadow, in the negative sense, but there's also a lot of playfulness, for example, that can come from that early stage of development, being in the moment, playing, kind of the instinctual, non-intellectual kind of being here, being now. That's kind of our that's kind of our core, you know. I mean, the child,
Yeah.
watching children, you know, yeah, they might say, this is mine, and no, hada illi, no, 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 no sharing, and that's kind of like that part that needs to grow, but their curiosity and their presence and their total commitment to what is right now.
Yeah, we need it. It's necessary,
I
that
mean, that's
part.
amazing, and who doesn't
Yeah.
want that? You know, talking
And,
about being present in hudur, that is
yeah.
it. You know, so it's like, how can we maintain the gift of each station? Because it is
Yeah,
maqam.
yeah, and that's really important what you just mentioned there, because I do this I do this little test of, I don't know if I mentioned this, of my friend. He had a child that was 1 or 2, and then another child that was around 5, and I threw the keys on the floor and I said, pick them up. And
Mm.
the little 1-year-old, he went into a full squat and picked them up, and then the 5-year-old bent over.
Yeah.
And I said, which one's got correct posture? And it was the
Mm.
1-year-old. So we want to keep that. I said, look how quickly we lose the fitrah.
Exactly.
And we need to, so we don't want to transcend that, and we need to include that aspect of
Mm.
us. Like, there's some fundamentals of our nafs that we need in order to play the game.
Totally.
And we lose a sense of that. And so sometimes we have to go back. This is really important, that we have to go back to bring that, you know, to where we're at.
Exactly. And same with lawama, I would argue. You know, healthy shame does have a place.
Mm,
Healthy shame has a place, you know, and if there's something that I'm doing wrong, I should feel like I'm doing wrong, and someone should be able to give me nasiha and tap into my lawama energy that's accountable and corrective, and I can develop that, whatever, or do what I have to do to restore balance again. You know, it's
yeah.
like all these things should be active, you know. And I just had this image, not to say I'm a big advocate of this, you know, model, but like the different chakras, you know, it's like the energy chakra at the root of the spine, and then the belly and the heart level and the throat and whatever.
Yeah.
It's like when you move, when they talk about moving from center to center, they don't turn off the other centers.
Yeah.
You know, everything's online. They just like, you know, it's like that game you hit at the carnival, and then all the lights light up. You know, you want as many lights to light up as possible.
And you can always revisit the earlier ones and refine them even deeper and get a deeper understanding of them. So, for example, even in Arabic, as an Arabic teacher, we can go back to the fundamentals and revisit them. And then you realize, oh, I'm doing that even as a teacher of Arabic, and I've been studying for 22 years, is that I get a greater way of refining my understanding of these concepts and new insights into them. So we want to revisit even the most primal parts of us, because as we do revisit them, we get a more refined understanding of them.
I remember hearing one of our teachers, Dr. Omar Farouk Abdullah, here in Chicago, one time say that studying Nahu for him is intoxicating. And this is someone who's studied for decades, and, you know, mashallah, he's a great sheikh and learned scholar and academic, everything. And he says, you know, learning Nahu, the Ajurumiyya, for him is intoxicating, just because this is the bare bones essentials for it. This whole path, this whole trajectory, this whole journey for him was this book, was this initial starting point. And so going back to it now for him is just, and he talked about gaining more insight and constantly unfolding more meanings. And this is the way of the great people. Yeah. You know, it's like always going back to the beginning. And it's that idea of the spiral, like always coming back to the beginning, but you're rising, but you're coming back again to something from a higher perspective, or a more developed, more matured consciousness.
And as you go higher, sometimes you need to go back down to sort of keep everything in balance. And so, you know, it's like, oh, I'm back to square one, you know, like the snakes and ladders, I've got to start all over. No, you're never doing that. Like, this happened for me, like for 4 or 5 months out of BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because of, you know, the situation. And it's like, it does feel like the first 2-3 weeks that you're back to square one, but you quickly get back into the sort of groove. And so never the same. You know, I always say this in couples therapy, when they go back into old patterns. No, you're never back where you started, because now you've got tools that you didn't have when you're back there. So now you know how to come out of the old patterns and get back into the groove. You can never go back to where you started. It's not possible.
Indeed, exactly. Yeah, mashallah. Exactly. So in terms of coming back to the Nefs, because I really wanted, you know, did you have anything else about in relation to the Nefs and the Jism? Because I know we talked
Yeah,
about
yeah,
that
yeah,
as well.
yeah. And again, I fundamentally believe that the nafs is the ruh, the nafs is the qalb, the nafs is the body.
I love
So
that. Yeah.
and it's everything. But then when we compartmentalize, obviously we can talk about separate things. But this is really important because remember, from a European perspective, the body was considered something that was impure,
Mm,
whilst the soul, when they say soul, and this is the ambiguous thing for us is that soul can refer in the Europe in Europe, or from a Christian perspective, we're talking like the spirit and the soul are completely, so they're the same thing, and it can be ambiguous.
mm,
This is why I like to call the nafs the soul, and when we're talking about soul, we're not talking about the ruh here. We're
mm.
talking about this sense of self.
Yeah.
But obviously the nafs can refer to the ruh, so we can have that ambiguity even in the Islamic tradition.
Hmm.
Um, but so it depends, and the body has natural intuitive capacities within us that we can't negate, and this is where people end up making a huge mistake. For example, my intuition, like animals have intuition. It's
Mm,
part of us, our makeup as animals, that we intuit when something's safe and when something's not safe.
hmm.
That's a fundamental part of our makeup.
Mm,
That's not a ruhi thing, but it has aspect. Obviously, as you were saying before, they all interconnect with these things. So we have more spiritual intuition that's
hmm.
connected to deeper things, and more, broader things, I probably should say. But
Mm,
fundamentally, the body has things in it that we have to listen to. But what happens often in my clinical practice is they demonize and distrust that sense of those intuitions.
yeah.
And you often get that question, how do I know if this is my qalb, and how do I know if this is my nafs?
Mm,
you know and I say to them, I say, look, this is how I define things, just from a pragmatic approach, is the shaitan can play with the nafs, because the nafs can go to extremes, because it's primitive, and it's primitive. And so what we need to do is we need to work with it and nurture it and be there and be cautious around it and mindful, but we can't neglect its needs. The shaitan is the capacity, and I'm not saying that shaitan is just a psychological abstraction. No, we as Muslims obviously believe he's a reality.
yes. Yes.
But I find it useful to look at it from a psychological perspective. Shaitan is something that's erratic, and it wants you to take you far. Those two things.
Mm,
So if something's and the nafs can become erratic, and it can go far from demonic forces that that incite it to indulge and not reach for higher things. So
mm,
if that notion's coming to you feels erratic, and it feels it's taking you away from your nature, then you need to guard yourself against that.
hmm.
But if it's speaking to a deep intuitive sense of something's wrong in my life, something's not right and off, you need to listen to that, because it's speaking. And what's fundamental, it feels something that's core and deep when it's your nafs from a healthy perspective, that
Mm,
intuitive nafs. If it's like a bit all out there, it's more demonic. It doesn't
mm.
feel like, it just feels a more like external force. Like
Nice.
when I see an ice cream and I just like go, and I said I was supposed to go in and just get some vegetables.
Right.
That's demonic.
Mm.
Because it's taking
It
you
takes
away
you
from
away.
your objective. Yeah, it feels
Mm.
external. It's external, and it's like drawing you away from yourself. Whilst if that's my distinction for people when they're asking, is
Yeah.
this the nafs or is this shaitan? Shaitan.
I love that. And so in some way we can begin to differentiate these different impulses and voices, maybe we can say, by their implications, by what they're kind of guiding to.
Yeah,
Because I mean, like, even with the qalb and the aql and stuff like that, we believe as Muslims, and our ulama always say, is that these are not different realities. This is mm,
yeah,
one substance, if you
yeah,
will,
yeah,
or
yeah,
one jawhar, but depending on its ta'alluq. It
yeah,
has a qalbi kind of faculty, or it has a ruhi, or it has a sirri, whatever
yeah,
faculty. So it's depending on, like, and the way I was trying to conceptualize this, kind of just thinking about it this week, was it has different language, like the qalb's language, and the aql has a language that it speaks. And so it's kind of like what you were saying, depending on the language and the implications of what it's guiding you to, you can begin to know something.
Mm.
You know, I remember Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Shaghuri talked about the 4 different types of khawatir. There's nafsani, shaitani, malakani, and rahmani. And so you know, how do you know them? Well, you know them by what are they guiding you to? Turning towards sin, towards, you know, volume, or towards whatever, jahid, or is it towards ibadah? Is it towards khidmah, toward, you know, ikhlas, whatever? Like, what's it guiding you to? You know things. And, you know, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam teaches us to take a fatwa from our qalb, I mean, this is something that's very, how do you listen to that? You have to develop that kind of, you know, hearing. You have to be able to hear deeply, not just with your ears and the acoustic kind of neuronal pathways and stuff like that, but it's a really deep listening. Sama' is not just a nervous system function.
Yeah.
And as we begin to really go in and be curious and listen and not be impulsive to judge.
That's fundamental. That's how we distinguish. That's how we combat the shaitan. As soon as we become contemplative, take our time, inquire, we've protected ourselves from the shaitan.
And that's it.
And especially in a therapeutic, like with a sheikh or with a, you know, whoever's you're sitting with and working things through, there's an other as a reference as well. You know, so you've got the counsel, but you've also got the taking the time and the inquiry and what's this speaking to?
Yes.
So even the shaitan can be a guide from that perspective because he's taking you away from something. What is it he's taking you away from? So he's actually done you a favor here.
Yeah, he'll clarify. That's probably where I have to go. If he's pulling me this way, this is where I'm going to go.
Yeah. So, you know, and so all of these are ayat, you know, signs pointing us to what do we need. So even when the abuse, you know, we can be abusive and we can do dhulm, but what's it really speaking to that we're, you know, why are we acting out like this? And to inquire and explore what's it really needing to what are you really needing here that's going to nourish and help you grow. So you bring it back to what's important.
Yeah. MashaAllah. Yeah. So at the end, really, we can say that the conception of the nafs that we're talking about is one that's nutritive, that's process oriented, that's developmental, as opposed to one that is, I mean, I don't even know how to word it, but like toxic shame driven and fragmenting and dissociating and self-harming. You know, it's like, that's what I'm sure you see it. I know you see it. I see it all the time, all the time. And it's like, this is not healthy. I don't care who told you that. It's affecting all of your relationships. It's affecting your work and your ibadah. You're telling me this yourself. I'm not assuming that. You're telling me my life is crazy. And I can't hold down my job. I'm having trouble with fajr and my wirid or whatever, even just basic things. I'm not fasting Ramadan. I really struggled with it. Tayyib. You're telling me that my nefs is the one who's making me do this. I hate my nefs. I should just kill myself. How do I get rid of my nefs? It's like, whoa. Let's slow this down. I think that mentality is probably driving your presentation in the first place. Let's uncouple that, because that relationship with yourself is totally unnatural. I would argue un-Islamic. Bare bones. It's not human. You know, I mean.
You asked a very fundamental question. I know that Gabor Mates asks is, if you were to imagine yourself, like objectify yourself at this point, see yourself as someone else, would you do that to another human being? That's considered abuse.
Totally, absolutely.
You know, you could go down for that sort of treatment to another. Why on earth are you doing it to yourself?
Exactly, and that's one of the clinical kind of not, I guess, tools or something that we can, you know, like, imagine your daughter telling you that you had this issue. What would you do? Oh, I would flip the world upside down to help her kind of shift that for her. How did you learn that? What happened? That's so heartbreaking for me. And now, okay, and then they get it, you know, and how does that feel to hear you say that? You know, and sometimes, no, but you don't know how bad I am. Or, you know, or, and then there's this deep stillness for a moment, you know, and then you just let that sit. Because there is a paradox, the paradoxical relationship we can have with ourselves. And this is what I often say is the root of narcissism, in fact. It's actually this false self. We don't have a connection to our true self. which is just not like our higher reality, our Sufi, whatever. It's you. Who is Mazen? Who is Idris? Who is Fulan Fulan? Who are you essentially? And can you be real with what's coming up for you and allow your journey to unfold in the way that Allah Ta'ala wants it to unfold without you getting in the way of it? And if not, then how are you adapting? What's your relationship with yourself? What is your belief system? What is your relational kind of apparatus that you relate to self and not self and God through? That's the false self. I mean, I often say that's the Nafs. You know, for example, in NARM, we talked about the NARM model that we both practice and study. There's a survival strategy that comes in early on. And often I've been kind of just holding this for myself and reflecting on it. In some way, that can be like the shadow part of the Nafs, because that's what holds back that growth into Nafs al-Lawwama, Nafs Mutma'inna, and these other higher stages, because people will just stay there. They fragment, develop this survival strategy, how to cope with the loss of the grief of not having nurturing parents or safety or whatever. And that's where they get stuck. And then they tell themselves, I'm at this and I'm at that. And usually it's very unhealthy. Even if it's pride-based and very, grandiose, there's still also with it kind of, kind of like a mere shame and feeling very small. And that's why when the grandiose people get triggered, it's over, because it's that part that feels small and insecure, that tender spot that
so kind of needs to use power and strength to protect it.
It goes into the grandiose, times 10, 2.0, just to kind of support that. But you know that they're deep down in that unconscious part of them, that's what's being held and protected ultimately. So the Nefs, in some way, even with the survival strategy, in some way, it's not even a negative thing. And I often tell people, this thing doesn't make you bad or evil or whatever. You're protecting yourself from something. And so there's a rahmah all around here. Its whole model is infused with rahmah. And that's what I will cling to. Sidi Hakim, one of the first lessons Hakim taught me was that to study and to practice medicine is to really recognize the rahmah of Allah Ta'ala in the world. I mean, I'm getting tears just saying it. I mean, just because you see it every day, people just not having that rahmah for themselves and for one another, and they can't recognize it. Allah Ta'ala has forsaken me, Allah Ta'ala has gone away from me. And then it just reinforces, I hate myself and I must be so bad. And la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Quite everything, even the thing that's veiling you from yourself, this false image, you're doing it because you're protecting yourself from something, and you have to recognize that as a rahmah in some way. And now we just have to slow things down and begin to be curious and be gentle and unpack these things and process and begin to get back on track, get back on the journey path, so you can grow through these different stages. And it's never too late for that. I shared recently, with somebody else, I have this 60-year-old, maybe I shared with you guys before as well, but the Syrian uncle that came, and he told me at 60-something years old, I asked him what he wanted, and he said, I want you to help me fulfill my potential. I feel like there's still so much in me to give, and I feel stuck. And I'm like, oh my God, I love you. It's just like amazing, just that impulse. He felt it, at 60-something years old, there's something within me that's undeveloped. I'm blocking myself in some way. And I want you to help me contact that and explore that and bring it forward. And so that's all, that door is always there. And it's
and Allah doesn't He looks for us to have the intention to grow. And that's what He looks at. He doesn't look at whether we get there. And we all want to get there, but there's always more room for growth. But Allah you see all those hadith about the people that did gross things, but they were forgiven. It was that sense of brokenness and sense of wanting to change. And, that's the bare minimum that we can have within us, that we're not satisfied, but we also don't have to expect we need to get there. We move towards it. And that's what, if we die before we get there, Allah rewards us according to our intention. And there's a huge relief there, because we're not, Islam's, it's not about just productivity. It's about a desire to grow that Allah wants to see from us. And then, fundamentally, we move, but we leave the rest to Allah.
Alhamdulillah. I think this was actually our next topic we had on the list was process-oriented versus goal-oriented type of approaches to therapy, but also life. If we're always seeking after, and even I just came to mind, al-jar thumma ad-dar. In some way, it's like you're seeking this great destination and all the glory of the treasures, and it's like, but it's the relationship at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, we lose that relationship with the productivity. I mean, I see that in clients so often when they become solutions. They're looking for solutions and tell me what to do. I says, before we do that, we need to feel relationship.
Yeah,
exactly. And then the solutions, they just feel like they're galvanized. We feel the force galvanize and come to push it in that direction. And so the first point is, wait a minute, let's be in relationship. Let's feel relationship first. Because we know as therapists, when we start getting into that solving for the client, you can feel the energies like, this is not an hour session. I'm getting caught here. And, running there trying to help the person, and you're like, I'm losing my sense of self here.
Right. Yeah, when you said that thing about not being goal oriented in life, I was like, that's my work. I know that really well.
Oh yeah. And it's not to dismiss the goal orientedness, but it's got to have the foundation of being sort of, being okay with yourself. Exactly. and relating to yourself and relating to others.
Yeah.
Because we've seen that in parenting, haven't we? Is that where it's all like where children only feel loved if they're achieving. And you see what happens there. They can never be with themselves because they're constantly chasing a sense of well-being in getting more, achieving more,
being perfect.
And being there for others, but not being for themselves. You see that classic
all the time. Yeah. All the time. Absolutely. Yeah. Alhamdulillah.
Right, yeah, we could speak for hours.
We can go for hours. Any final thoughts for us, Sidi, before we close up for today?
No, I mean, I think we've already touched on it from a practical point of view. See where you're becoming activated. And I say, where we're becoming childlike. And childlike is basically where we lose our grip. It's where the prefrontal cortex, like Dr. Daniel Siegel says, the prefrontal cortex loses its grip. The limbic brain's all over here. Okay, let's just calm things down, soothe. Let that prefrontal cortex come back on. That's Nafs al-Ammara, that's Nafs al-Ammara.
Yeah.
And then, then after the prefrontal cortex comes back on, then you're like, whoa, that was a bit embarrassing for me to do that. I need to up my game. There's Nafs al-Lawama.
Aywa, mashallah. Very nice.
And then, where is it like I can feel a sense of contentment even when I'm falling, making mistakes, but there's an okayness, there's an underlying okayness that we get there. There's like this maturity. That's nafs al-mutma'inna. So, and again, there are higher realities to these. I'm not denying that, of course.
No doubt.
But we have to start with the basics. And so this is a very fundamental, basic thing for us we can work with in our daily life. Where is this showing up? And and knowing when to just slow things down and bring things back online.
Yes, alhamdulillah. Well, that's a great place to end. Sidi, Jazakallah khair. Thank you for joining us today. That is episode 6. I hope you all enjoyed that. For those that stayed with us for the whole conversation, please like, comment, share, feedback, questions, inquiries, things you want us to expand on. We're looking for topics to continue this conversation with, inshallah ta'ala. And so please feel free to feedback. And inshallah, we'll catch you all next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.